The wind coming off Miller's field was sharp enough to sting, carrying with it the faint, sour tang of turned soil. Officer Nate Rourke tightened his grip on the leash, but Coda, his K9, had gone statue still. Ears forward, hackles up, eyes locked on something in the tall grass, just beyond the rusted wire fence. Nate followed the dog's gaze and felt his stomach shift. There was movement out there, slow and deliberate, like someone trying not to be seen. He opened his mouth call out, but Coda's low growl rolled through the dusk, warning him, "Don't look away." If you like stories where one wrong glance changes everything, stay close. What waits past that fence will follow you long after the last page. The chain-link fence rattled in the wind, the sound sharp and metallic against the softest of grass bowing under the late October breeze. The sun had already slipped below the tree line, leaving the sky that in-between shade of blue where details blur and shadows grow teeth. Nate Rourke stood shoulder to shoulder with Coda, the 80-pound Belgian Malinois, vibrating with tension at the end of the lead. The dog's gaze stayed locked on grass ahead, but Nate's own eyes swept left, then right, scanning for any shape that shouldn't be there. "This where you're taking me, huh?" he muttered, voice low, more to steady himself than to talk to the dog. His breath misted in the cooling air. Miller's Field wasn't a place locals wandered after dark. Not since the Carroll boy vanished 2 summers ago. The search had gone on for weeks. Police, volunteers, even a few people from out of town with drones and search dogs. Nothing. The official word was that maybe he'd hopped a train, but nobody in town believed that. Nate remembered the mother's face when the search was called off. She had that hollow look you see in people who've been waiting for news so long. They've stopped breathing without noticing. Coda shifted, pulling him forward until the leash was taut. Nate followed, boots crunching the frost-tipped weeds. The old fence was missing a panel about 20 feet down, a ragged opening where rusted wire curled back like torn skin. The wind whistled through it. The grass on the other side stood waist-high, the stalks whispering together in restless patterns. Nate could see the movement now. Too steady for wind, too controlled for wildlife. "Hello." His voice carried, flat in the cold air. The movement stilled. Nate's pulse stepped up. Coda gave a single sharp bark, then froze again, body low, ears pinned. The leash thrummed between them like a live wire. A faint metallic click reached his ears, soft, deliberate, like a knife being folded shut. "Who's there?" Nate's hand hovered near the butt of his holstered sidearm. Nothing. Coda eased forward 1 step, nostrils flaring. Nate caught a sour, coppery tang mixed with the smell of damp soil. Blood. Not fresh, but not old enough to forget. "All right," Nate said under his breath, more for himself than anyone else, and ducked to the gap in the fence. The ground on the far side was softer, the earth freshly turned in uneven patches. The air seemed to thicken here, the kind of silence that swallows up sound instead of letting it go. Coda stopped dead again, nose angled toward a darker patch in the grass. Nate squinted. There was something there, a mound, maybe a tarp or an old blanket, half hidden under tangled weeds. The shape was wrong. Too small for an adult, too still to be alive. His throat went dry. "Coda, heel." The dog didn't move. His muscles quivered under the leash, eyes locked on the shape, and Nate realized Coda wasn't afraid. He was waiting. Nate took a careful step closer. His boot brushed something in the grass, a strip of yellow cloth, frayed at the edge. It looked like part of a child's raincoat. "Shit." The word escaped before he could stop it. From behind the mound came another sound, a quick, rustling shift of weight. Not running, not hiding, watching. Nate's instinct screamed at him to move, but every step forward felt like crossing an invisible line he wouldn't be able to uncross. Then, from the shadows, a low voice. "Ruff, Mayo, you shouldn't be here, officer. Do you want to keep going to the rest of Chapter 1 until it reaches its full 1,500 words? Or stop here?" You said, "Next." ChatGPT said. Chapter 1, The Edge of Miller's Field continued. Nate's hand settled on his sidearm, not drawing it. Yet, but close enough that the warning was clear. "Coda, stay," he said quietly. The dog's body was coiled tight, like a spring straining against a safety pin. The grass rustled again, and a figure emerged, slow, deliberate, He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a canvas jacket stained dark at the cuffs. The brim of his cap shadowed his eyes, but Nate recognized the jawline. Roy Mathers. The name landed like a stone in Nate's gut. Roy had been questioned after Carol Boy went missing. Questioned hard, but nothing had stuck. He was one of those men who kept to himself, did odd jobs, and made people uneasy without breaking any laws you could prove. "What are you doing out here, Roy?" Nate kept his tone even, but his pulse thudded in his ears. "Checking my traps," Roy said. His voice was gravel ground over something oily. "Same as I've been doing for years." Nate's eyes flicked toward the dark mound. "That yours?" Roy's mouth twisted. "Fields full of junk. Kids dump stuff out here all the time." Coda gave another low growl, barely audible but steady. The dog didn't believe him. Nate didn't either. "Mind stepping away from it?" Nate asked. Roy didn't move. His shoulders squared slightly. The kind of shift you make before deciding whether you're going to fight or bolt. "Not your jurisdiction to tell me where I can stand, Rourke. This here's private land." Nate's grip tightened on the leash. "Private or not, I've got probable cause if I think there's evidence connected to an investigation." Roy's gaze sharpened. "Investigation's over. Or did they not tell you?" They'd told him. But cold cases have a way of sticking to your ribs, especially when you can still picture the missing kid's mother standing in the sheriff's office doorway, refusing to leave. Nate took a step toward the mound. That's when Roy's hand twitched near his jacket pocket. Not a weapon. At least, Nate didn't see one, but enough to make his muscles clench. Coda barked once, loud and sharp, and surged forward. Nate held the leash, but the movement startled Roy enough for Nate to close the distance. He yanked back the weeds covering the shape on the ground. It wasn't a tarp. It was a child's sleeping bag, faded blue with cartoon rockets on it. The zipper was half open, and inside was a jumble of things: mud-cake sneakers, a plastic flashlight, and a stuffed bear with one button I'm missing. Every item was damp with recent exposure, the smell of earth heavy on them. "These yours, Roy." Nate's voice had dropped, hard and flat. Roy didn't answer. "You're coming with me," Nate said. Roy smiled. "Slow wrong." "No, I'm not." Before Nate could react, Roy spun and vanished into the grass, moving faster than a man his size had any right to. Nate swore under his breath, unclipped Coda's lead, and the dog bolted, weaving through the grass in pursuit. The sound of the chase tore through the field, stalks breaking, paws pounding Roy's ragged breath. Nate followed, the cold air slicing his lungs. Then Coda barked, once, twice, and the sound cut off, replaced by a yelp. Nate's stomach dropped. He pushed harder, bursting into a small clearing where the grass gave way to bare earth. Coda stood there, hackles high, pacing in tight circles. Roy was gone. In the middle of the clearing was a hole, freshly dug, maybe 3 feet deep, and inside it, half covered in dirt, was something that froze Nate where he stood. A small, pale hand. "Do you want to continue directly into Chapter 2, or do you want the rest of Chapter 1 to close out with Nate's immediate reaction before moving forward?" You said, "Next." ChatGPT said, "Chapter 2, The Hand in the Earth." The cold hit Nate all at once, slicing through the adrenaline that had been keeping him upright. His breath came ragged, the metallic scent of disturbed soil pressing into his nostrils. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stare at that hand, so still, so pale it almost blended with the frost-dusted dirt. Coda circled the hole once more, whining low in his throat. His paws were muddy, claws caked with the same damp earth that clung to the half-buried form. Nate forced himself to kneel. His knees sank into the cold ground, the damp soaking through his pants. He reached out with a gloved hand and brushed away just enough dirt to reveal a small wrist, thin as a sapling. No visible decomposition. Whoever this was, they hadn't been here long. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady as he reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Rourke. I need a forensics unit and backup at Miller's Field. Possible 10 to 54. Send the coroner." The reply crackled through the static. "Copy that, Rourke. Units en route." Coda stopped pacing and planted himself at Nate's side, his body angled toward the grass beyond the clearing. Nate knew that look, alert but not for the body, for whatever else was out there. Roy. The thought of the man's retreating figure burned in Nate's mind. The hole was fresh, the dirt loose. Roy had been digging when they'd found him. Nate brushed more soil away, revealing part of the child's forearm. A thin blue bracelet was looped around it, plastic beads spelling out ELLA. The name hit him like a punch. Ella Carmichael, 7 years old, reported missing 2 days ago after failing to come home from a friend's house. The search parties had been combing the woods north of town, but Millersfield hadn't been part of the official grid, too far from where she was last seen. He closed his eyes for a beat, feeling the weight of it settle in his chest. "Easy, girl," he murmured to Coda. The dog's ears flicked at the tone, but her body stayed taut. The sound of distant sirens finally filtered in, faint but growing. Nate stood, scanning the grass line, but there was no sign of movement. When the other units arrived, the scene shifted into a mechanical rhythm. Crime scene tape, evidence markers, flashlights sweeping the field. The coroner worked silently, her breath ghosting the beam of her headlamp as she documented every angle before the body was lifted from the earth. Sheriff Langley stepped up beside Nate, the brim of his hat low against the cold wind. "Tell me." Nate kept it short. Coda's alert, Roy's appearance, the sleeping bag, to chase the hole. Langley's jaw worked slowly as he listened. "You think it was him?" the sheriff asked. "I think he was digging that hole when I got here," Nate said, "and I think he's still close." Langley's eyes narrowed. "We didn't get anything to stick last time. This time, we make it clean." They both knew what that meant. Procedure had to be airtight. Roy Mathers was slippery, the kind of man who knew just enough about the law to dance around it. The coroner's voice cut in. "Prelim says she's been gone less than 48 hours. We'll know more at the lab." Langley nodded once, then turned back to Nate. "Get Coda on him. If he's out here, I want him in cuffs before sunrise." They started at the gap in the fence where Nate had first seen him. Coda lowered her nose, nostrils flaring, and took off a steady lope, weaving through the grass. The beam of Nate's flashlight bobbed over the uneven ground as he followed. The trail curved east toward the tree line. Every so often, Coda would stop, sniff, and adjust course. The night pressed in heavier here, the trees breaking the wind, but amplifying every crack of a twig underfoot. About 50 yards in, they found the first sign. A cigarette, but still faintly warm. Nate bagged it, marking the spot in his mental map. Another 100 yards, and Coda froze. Ahead, just visible through the trees, was a faint glow of a fire. Nate killed his flashlight and crouched, letting his eyes adjust. The fire was small, barely more than embers, but enough to show the silhouette of a man hunched over something. His jacket matched the one Nate had seen earlier. He motioned Coda to stay and move low, stepping around branches with the care of someone who'd done this before. A faint sound reached him, metal scraping against wood. Not a trap, a box. Nate edged closer until he could make out what Roy was doing. He had an old wooden crate open in front of him, pulling out items one at a time. A small shoe, a piece of yellow cloth, a rusted flashlight. Nate's stomach turned. These weren't random. They were trophies. He stepped into the light, weapon drawn. Roy Mathers. Hand where I can see him. Roy didn't startle. He lifted his head slowly, eyes catching the firelight in a way that made Nate's skin prickle. "You always were too late, Rourke," Roy said, his voice low and steady. "But this one," he gestured toward the crate. "This one's different. On your knees. Now." Roy's smile was a slow, deliberate thing. "You think you know what's going on here. You don't." Before Nate could react, Roy tipped the crate, spilling its contents into the dirt. The shoe rolled toward the fire, and Nate saw something else tumble out. A small plastic bracelet, identical to Ella's, except this one spelled M-A-Y-A. The name caught in Nate's throat. Maya Benson, missing 4 years. Case cold. Roy's voice came soft, almost conversational. "They're all here, Rourke, just not the way you're looking for." For a second, Nate thought the night itself was holding its breath. The fire hissed softly as a log shifted, sending up a faint puff of sparks. Coda, just behind him, stood rigid, her gaze locked on Roy like she was waiting for one wrong twitch. "Step away from the crate," Nate ordered, his voice carrying more steel now. Roy rose, slow and deliberate, his hands lifting only halfway before pausing at chest level. If I take a step, you're going to see something you can't unsee, Rourke. Try me. Roy's head tilted. In the firelight, the creases of his face looked deeper, carved in by years of something darker than just hard living. The ground out here isn't honest, he said. It hides what you tell it to hide, and sometimes it gives it back. Nate took 2 steps forward, closing the space. His weapon stayed trained on Roy, his peripheral vision catching the scattered objects in the dirt. A yellow ribbon, a chipped plastic barrette, a crumpled drawing of a house with a stick figure family, edges smeared with dirt. Maya Benson, Nate said, his voice low. That's what this is? Roy didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the fire for just a fraction of a second. That was enough. Coda, take him. The dog lunged, a blur of muscle and teeth. Roy staggered back, his hands flying up as Coda clamped onto the thick canvas of his jacket sleeve. Nate moved in fast, kicking the crate away from the fire and driving Roy to his knees. Hands behind your head. Now! Roy gave a short, ragged laugh but obeyed, the sound making Nate's stomach knot. You're too late for some of them, he said as Nate cuffed him. But there's one that's still waiting. Not far from here. What the hell are you talking about? Nate's grip tightened on his collar, dragging him to his feet. Roy's eyes glittered in the firelight. You'll see. She's not in the ground. By the time backup arrived, Roy was shackled in the back of a cruiser, Coda pacing around the car with her ears flat. The crate's contents were sealed in evidence bags, each item tagged under the watchful eye of the sheriff. Langley stepped over to Nate, his expression unreadable. We'll tear this whole place apart if we have to. Every inch. We're not done, Nate said, scanning the tree line. The words Roy had used, not on the ground, kept circling in his head like vultures. Langley followed his gaze. You think he's playing you? Nate's jaw worked. Maybe. Or maybe he wants us to find her. And why would he want that? That's what scares me, Nate said quietly. They searched until nearly dawn. Teams spread out with high-powered flashlights, weaving between the skeletal tree trunks. Twice, Coda picked up faint scents that went cold after a few hundred yards. At 4:37 a.m., one of the deputies called over the radio. Rourke, we got something. Nate and Coda were the first to arrive. The deputy stood at the base of a broad oak, its roots knotted above the frost-hardened ground. There, wedged into the hollow where the trunk split, was a small, dirty backpack. Nate crouched and opened it. Inside were clothes, pink leggings, a T-shirt with a unicorn on it, a pair of socks rolled tight. Beneath them was a juice box and a half-empty granola bar, both fresh. Coda whined softly, nose pressing toward the tree. Bag it, Nate told the deputy. His voice clipped. He ran a hand over the bark, finding faint scratches just above head height, like someone had been climbing. He straightened slowly. If she's not in the ground, she could still be moving. Langley arrived a few minutes later, jaw tight. You're thinking alive? I'm thinking Roy's got someone else out here. And if we don't figure out where, sunrise might be too late. Langley looked toward the horizon, where the first pale threads of morning were bleeding into the sky. Then we move now. Nate gave Coda the scent from the backpack. The dog's ears perked instantly, her body shifting into that lean, forward pull. She set off toward the north ridge without hesitation, the leash taut in Nate's grip. Half a mile in, the trees thinned into another clearing. An old barn squatted there, half collapsed, its roof caved on one side. Frost coated the rusted hinges of its wide doors. Coda stopped dead at the threshold, her muscles trembling under Nate's hand. Her nose pressed toward the narrow gap between the doors, where the darkness inside seemed thicker than it should be. Nate leaned in, peering through the crack. A pair of eyes stared back, wide, unblinking, and very much alive. For a long second, Nate didn't move. The eyes in the darkness stayed locked on his, wide and still, the faint light from outside catching just enough to show the sheen of tears. Coda gave a low, urgent whine. It's okay, Nate said softly, lowering himself to one knee. I'm with the police. You're safe now. No response. The gap between the barn doors was just wide enough for him to slide one hand inside. The air was cold and stale, thick with the scent of mildew and old hay. I'm going to open the door, all right? Don't be scared. When he pulled, the hinges screamed, echoing across the clearing. Sunlight spilled in, striping the dirt floor. She was huddled in the corner, knees to her chest, wearing a dirt-smudged pink sweatshirt. Ella Carmichael, exactly as she'd been in the photo on the missing poster, except for the hollow look in her eyes. Nate took a slow step forward. Ella? Her gaze flicked past into Coda, and for the first time, there was movement. A tremor in her chin, a slight reach of one hand toward the dog. Coda patted forward, slow and low, stopping just close enough for Ella to press her fingers into the fur at her neck. That broke her. A sob shuddered through her small frame, and Nate felt his own throat tighten. It's over, he said. You're going home. The sound of boots on frost made him turn. Sheriff Langley was crossing the clearing with 2 deputies, their breaths steaming in the cold air. We got her. Langley's voice was a whisper. Yeah, Nate said, keeping his tone low for Ella's sake. She's alive. Langley's eyes softened for a fraction of a second before they hardened again. Then we need to move. I don't want Roy anywhere near here. They bundled Ella in a deputy's coat, keeping her between Nate and Coda as they led her out into the pale morning light. She winced at it, blinking rapidly, but she didn't let go of Coda. They were halfway back to the vehicles when the call came over Langley's radio. Be advised, Roy Mathers escaped custody during transfer. Unknown direction of travel. The words hit Nate like ice water. Son of a... Langley cut himself off, glancing at Ella. Nate felt her grip tighten on Coda's fur. We keep moving, he said, straight to the station. But deep down, he knew Roy wasn't gone. Not in the sense that mattered. 2 hours later, Ella was in the care of EMTs, her parents on their way. The barn was now a crime scene, with every inch being photographed and processed. Nate stood outside, sipping black coffee that had long since gone lukewarm. His eyes stayed on the tree line. Langley came up beside him. She say anything? Not much. Just that he made her wait. Said he'd be back when it was time. Langley grunted. Sick bastard. He paused. We'll find him. Nate wasn't so sure. Roy had slipped their grasp twice now. In that crate in the woods, there had been more items than they'd identified. Too many. That night, Nate sat at his kitchen table, Coda asleep at his feet. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. He pulled the file on the Carroll boy from his bag, laying out the photographs. One of them, a picture of the boy's red baseball cap, made his chest tighten. It wasn't in evidence. It wasn't anywhere they'd searched. He knew why. Roy still had it. 3 days later, Ella's family moved out of town. No goodbye, no public statement, just gone. Langley didn't blame them, and neither did Nate. But on Nate's last night of patrol that week, Coda stopped dead again. Same as before, rigid ears forward. Only this time they were on the edge of the same field, facing the opposite tree line. Nate's hand rested on her neck. What is it, girl? She stared into the dark for a long time before her ears slowly eased back and she sat down. Whatever had been there was gone. Nate let out a slow breath. We'll get him, he murmured. The night air carried the scent of frost and damp soil. Somewhere out there, Roy was moving again. But for now, Ella was alive. And sometimes, in this line of work, that had to be enough.